welcome everybody who just joined. My name's Brianne. We're here with Courtney, and oh, good. Okay, that helped. Yeah, I think Courtney will probably leave her video off as well, so the sound can really be what we're focusing on. So some of the other little technical housekeeping stuff I want to go over real quick is it seems like we all are clear on how to keep ourselves muted, turn our video on and off. Again, you'll be invited to unmute yourself at a certain point when we open it to discussion, and there'll be a few ways to do that. You can use your voice and unmute, or you can use the chat. And it looks like we're all familiar with the chat as well. If you want to practice and haven't yet, you can chat in where you're zooming from. So we know that that's working for everyone, and we get to see where you are. The last part about the Zoom is we'll be screen sharing like this the whole time. So some of how you're viewing it is going to be up to you to manage. You want to make sure you can see the slides. That's kind of the most important part. So if you're in full screen view right now, you'll probably have the box of like talking Zoom heads to the right. And you can minimize that. You can move it around your screen wherever it needs to be. Hey, Elizabeth. You can also move the chat box where you need it to be if you're in full screen. If you don't like that view, you can hit escape, and then that will immediately bring the boxes of everyone's Zoom into this long row above the screen share. And that's what I prefer, but like I said, kind of manage the view that's best for you and kind of least distracting. So when we're observing the piece, that's really what you can focus on. Yeah, and then just a little bit about kind of setting the stage here. Like I said in the email, just some of the expectations and our intentions. This is not going to be a formal lecture. We're really super structured. And it's less about the academic historical side of things. We'll bring in some factual concepts that can maybe deepen our understanding, our inquiry, but this is really a place for everyone to have a voice, and everyone's insights and thoughts and observations, those are all important and all matter. So we want space for all of that, and kind of the less that we can, the museum side can be talking, the better. That's one of the tenets of slow art, in addition to being with a piece of art for a prolonged period of time, which is longer than an average 30 seconds, right, that someone takes to observe a piece of art. Another tenet is to do it with other people. So be in this reflective space, and the more that we're sharing what we're seeing, what we're feeling, that's going to enrich and deepen all of our experiences. So I just want to encourage you to be curious, to be open-minded here, and then, be considerate of your fellow observers and let everyone kind of use their voice if they want to. And one way to do that too, as a reminder, is if you're not speaking or sharing, just keep yourself muted. That helps with Zoom to be able to focus on who is speaking. So I'm going to start us with a brief grounding, centering exercise to kind of tap more into our body and our senses and the moment. And then I'll turn it over to Courtney, and you guys will have a nice long time to observe the piece and kind of be with each other as well. So if you'll humor me for just a little bit, we're going to get grounded into our seat in the moment. And so that might mean you want to put your feet firmly on the floor, maybe feel that connection. Whatever helps you kind of feel like you're sitting up nice and tall and open, but also relaxed. So feel like you're in a supported seat here. If you're standing, maybe that's more comfortable. And then if it works for you, let's close our eyes. And that kind of helps us turn our senses that are pretty much constantly processing external stimuli and the outer world. It just kind of helps us recenter, focus maybe a little more within, and relax into the moment. So maybe here's your kind of grounding, letting go of your day. Maybe your body can soften just a little bit. Maybe that's the shoulders releasing down from your ears, your jaw relaxing. finding some space right here and now to come more and more into the moment. So inviting yourself into the present by way of coming into your body. Really taking some time to slow down, again, which is counter to what we might do every day or condition on a daily basis to keep going, keep accumulating, keep doing. This is not that. This is finding our focus, being as present with each moment as we can. And one of the best, most effective and accessible ways to do that is to come to our breath. So here in your nice, supported, grounded seat with your relaxed body, feel your body breathe. It might be the first time today you've noticed the breath moving through your body, so take some time. It doesn't matter the length or the pace of your breath, just feel it expand on the inhales. Maybe notice what the rib cage does, what other muscles in your upper body do to draw in that breath. And then you'll notice what the exhale feels like, releasing the breath. Take some time to tune in to your body breathing. Allow that to help to harness your attention. So letting the events of your day fall away as you keep focusing as much as you can on your breath. And then maybe intentionally putting anything on pause that's after this experience. It will be there when you're done. Allowing that refocus your attention to the breath. Maybe as you do this, the breath inherently becomes a little deeper. It doesn't have to be. You might purposely deepen the breath. That's fine. Notice this as an anchor for your awareness. So each breath is this opportunity to choose where you're placing your attention, where your senses are going, what you're noticing and feeling, as opposed to multiple things coming into process. You just, I'm at the breath right now. This focus of the breath might become an invitation to relax the mind and the body a little more, to open the heart and your curiosity a little more. Maybe the exhales allow you to release any barriers to being present or to really observing and digesting this piece with fresh eyes. So letting go what you need to. And another really great way to become a little more embodied and really focus your attention is through the senses. So not so much of the analytical mind, which is useful, but balancing that out and tuning into kind of our internal processing system. So here with the eyes closed and maybe something relaxed in the body and the mind, purposely shift as much attention and focus as you can to sound, to your sense of hearing. You might do this by noticing one sound on purpose at a time. Maybe you start to see how far away you can hear a sound, what's around you, and then draw that back and see how close can you hear. Do you hear your breath? Maybe you hear your heartbeat. Softly shifting this internal awareness this focused attention to the sense of touch. To really feel whatever supporting you beneath you with your seat, maybe with your feet. You might use your hands to touch whatever holding you up. Notice the texture. Tapping into this more observant, feeling, processing. Shifting to your sense of smell. Gather as much attention as you can to that and see what's around. Coming to your sense of taste when you're ready. Maybe there's something lingering on the tongue. Maybe the smell plays into that as well. We'll just take 2 more deep breaths here with the eyes closed, just feeling whatever is there, noticing on purpose. Feel your body breathe, deep breath. And gradually, slowly, when you're ready, we'll come to sight and blink the eyes open. And allow as much attention, focus, awareness to softly rest on the piece in front of you. And I'll turn it over to Courtney to get us started.
Thank you so much, Bree. I'm going to turn my camera back on briefly for just a moment. So if anybody was joining us late, you can put a face to my voice. But what we want to do as we're about to observe this piece is to continue that experience of slowness that I'm hoping you all just experienced in your own bodies, slowing down and paying attention to the sensory experiences around you. This is something that we'll bring to our observation throughout the next 45 minutes or so as we look at images of this work. And one of the challenges that we will experience together is that we are going to try and imagine with our minds and through some different sensory activities how we can explore this piece through a screen. That is definitely not the intention of the artist, for us to experience this piece at a distance. But I'm hoping that the images that we share and the way we can dive into some of the details that we have beautiful images of will actually let us get closer to the work and consider through that embodied sense all of the different facets of this piece and the ideas that it's bringing up for you all. So what we'll do together is we will quietly look at some images of this work that might recreate the type of experience that you would have if you were to see this in person in our museum park. First, we'll look at a long range, and then we'll zoom in on a couple details. And I want to continue that feeling of slowness, of paying attention with as many senses as you possibly can as we look quietly together. And then when we are finished looking at not only the piece as a whole, but some of those image details, I'll invite you to unmute yourselves if you feel moved to share, and we can start the discussion. But I'll let you know when that time is ready and we can bring it back together. As Bree mentioned, I'll turn off my camera so we can really experience the images of the piece together and seamlessly. Hopefully we won't run into any technological issues on my end. But we'll start our observation now and look at this for about a minute, and then look at some details of the piece for about another minute. So take about another 15 seconds and trace your eye all over this image. Notice what's drawing your attention. And then we'll move on. Okay, so this is a closer up detail of one section of the piece. Again, we'll look at this quietly for about a minute. Try and pay attention to what you're noticing to, and we will bring that to the discussion when we return in a little bit. And we'll look at one additional detail before we start to discuss and think together. This is another view of one section of the piece. Take another 30 seconds and just look with your eyes. Notice the thoughts that are coming up. And now we can start to come together and start to talk about our experience of what we are seeing and noticing. So one of the lovely things about being able to do this over Zoom is that we can return to previous views and look at details of this piece. So if there is anything that you would like to have us focus on, just let me know in the chat or by speaking up, and we can try and find an appropriate view that highlights what you're talking about. But now I'll welcome you to begin to unmute yourselves if you choose to speak, or to join in the chat if you prefer to stay muted and type. And the first thing I want to know is, what did you see? What did you notice when you were looking at this piece? We can go back to this view, if that's all right.
I noticed like a water fountain, a waterfall, and the brown and white at the bottom was just like bubbling water as it hit the pond.
That's wonderful. So something that reminds you of nature. Can you all see my cursor on the screen as I move it around?
Yes.
Wonderful. So is this the bubbling part that you were discussing?
Yes, that's the bubbling part.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.
I was struck by the three, that there are three shapes repeated, and three is such an important number in fairy tales and in other pieces that we have studied in the last week. So I'm just really struck by the similarities of the three pieces, but then you start focusing also on the differences.
Well, What are some of those similarities you're noticing?
One thing I noticed that I hadn't seen when I looked at the video or just looked at it before is in the middle section of the piece. If you go to the first piece, the one that's more blue, okay, and in the middle of that, there's a pattern that's repeated with the freestanding pieces on the grass.
Say more about that.
I think what struck me most was the fact that I hadn't seen it until I took the extra time to be staring at it. And then like, oh, wow, that does. So if you look below, like if the top part is, the more narrow straight part, and then,
right here.
yeah, and the bottom is the little buildings. The part, yeah, in the middle. Yeah.
This part down here.
Yeah. It folds over on itself. The way the pieces on the grass fold.
Yes, these sort of undulating forms.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Not to put words in your mouth, but I do love the word undulating. Did anyone else notice something that they were struck by that they perhaps hadn't noticed before? They had spent less time looking?
Well, this may be just because of, I guess, recent events, but that, again, that first piece with the verdigris finish, just really, the bottom of it just seemed so monumental. And then the top of it did not seem like something that needed to be taken down.
That's very interesting. Is that bringing anything else up for anyone else?
There's a few thoughts in the chat too. I don't know if you saw that.
There's some wonderful observations about the types of lines that we see in some of the forms of the piece. So Julia brought up the contrast between those types of lines, fluid and rigid. I think we were noticing that with some of those undulating forms set against the really tall spires of these monumental towers, and then some of the upright forms of the pieces down here. Also seeing some buzz in the chat about the pattern of the carpet, and that's lovely. We'll get to that. I have a great detail we can share in 1 second.
With this, the idea of contrast, that I'm really struck by the difference in scale. We've talked used some architectural terms, but to me, those central three projections are very temple-like. But then the little pieces around the base of them remind me of like topographical view of Manhattan or something like that. So the scale of the different parts, they're hard to reconcile in one piece for me.
Is that resonating with anyone else?
Yes, I would agree with that. Kind of what I felt like was the colorful pieces or the undulating pieces make me think of the rural areas that are around urban areas. The small buildings to me look like an urban area, and then you have this massive structure which looks almost out of place, but it dominates. It's the first thing that grabs your eye when you're looking at the piece, and you can never look away from it. And so it is disconcerting and a little bit jarring, and it does make me wonder, what's the artist trying to communicate? Is it to communicate some form of negativity about dominance, or is there a positive factor there that I can't quite pick up on?
That's a great question. I think I'll throw that out to the group. Do you see these big towering towers, I guess we can call them for lack of a better word, or ancient relics I saw in the chat? I think that's wonderful. do they have a sort of good feeling to you? Or do you feel like they are so dominant that they might have a little bit of ominous character to them? Too pretty to be ominous.
I guess I have a vision of like a Mayan temple, and then all of the small structures around it of places where the people would be outside, and it can be protective, but it can also be overwhelming domination depending on the people that are inside the temple rather than the people that are outside around it.
Mm.
I was thinking that the physical structure is not intimidating because it just narrows so much as it moves up. And things that are thin and spindly don't feel as intimidating to me.
Thank you. There is some sort of differential that we're noticing, whether it's something that we can observe as perhaps a power differential, something as simple as an architectural differential, but that disproportionate scale between the smallness of the wooden blocks that are down on the bottom and the size and scale of the towers is something that's very striking. I know there was a question about having people for scale, and while we don't have an image right here that has people, I will tell you that the size of the towers from the base to the very top of the spindle is about 16 feet tall. So we can think about, where would a person come up? Maybe about, right? Well, I don't know, actually, maybe right here, maybe right here. So when you are standing in front of some of these towers, the scale is still monumental. Even though we're looking at it, in an image, that is a part of the viewing experience that would be recreated if you were standing in front of this in person. I love the idea of a sacredness that's coming through for some of you. Does anyone want to speak on that a little bit more?
Yes, I find them very welcoming, and there's a sense of protectiveness around those blocks, which I think of as buildings, like the New York City buildings, and then these beautiful structures above going straight up into the sky.
The proportions do look similar to the upper part of the Empire State Building.
I also thought of the Statue of Liberty with Lady Liberty's arm raised.
That green sort of verdigris coloring on this one definitely can make us think of that as well. Yeah, I think y'all are right to pick up on a connection to New York in this piece. So I will just step back to give you a little context. This work that is a site-specific piece that is currently installed in our park had its first home in New York City in Madison Square Park. It was a commission to be sited in this beautiful park that's in the middle of the city. And the nice thing is that if you're on your computers right now, you can actually find an image of that if you're curious. We'll talk a little bit about the environment surrounding the piece in a second, but some of those references to buildings that perhaps are specific to New York, or perhaps specific to a city that has monumental skyscrapers, is absolutely something that the artist Leonardo Drew might have been thinking of as he was putting this together. So that perhaps might change some of the thoughts that you had, or might reinforce, but I think it's an architectural connection for sure I'm noticing is coming up, no matter if we're thinking about it in the context of a specific city or particular faith tradition. that's something I think the artist definitely wants us to notice and think about.
One of the things I noticed too was the green behind. And when you look at the photographs of the exhibit in New York City, it's surrounded by green. So it just blends. It seems to me that it blends, the urban and the natural seem to blend together.
I thought the same thing. I thought that that's what struck me, is how it fit in with the surroundings of the park very well. To my eye, it's pleasing. And to me, the shape seems somewhat organic, almost like a sandcastle in a way. But I like how it blends in with the park, even though it's architectural forms.
And then the roles of color, I'm, between each of the structures and looking at them closely with the design and the use of color and shape, I think it's wonderful. It feels sort of like an ocean to me.
So you're noticing some of those roles of shape, these forms down here, correct?
Yes.
Wonderful. Yeah. Let me zoom in now on a detail of that in particular, so we can really get a sense of some of the tiny details that you would see if you were to encounter this piece. I could see in the chat that there was some observation about this structure, and I want to know a little bit more, because we focus so much on the architectural elements, what y'all are thinking about or noticing with this part of the sculpture. I can see from the chat we're seeing a rolling of a carpet, perhaps water. What else is coming up?
Well, this may go back to the person who thought of the Mayan temples, but I thought of it as representing different Native American cultures, or maybe even expanding that into different ethnic cultures, because of the different colorations in each of them and the different shapes represented. From what I'm able to see from it, there are different patterns represented on each of these rolling forms.
What are you noticing specifically about some of the shapes or colors that you can see in some of these rolling, again, undulating forms? Anything recognizable?
Well, to me, the blues could be rivers, but they could also be stars in the rivers. I love the idea that perhaps he was thinking about all the different groups of people that have lived in Manhattan. So many different cultures have lived there from the beginning of human habitation. And then the one you're showing here, it looks a little bit like there's a little elf there with the red cap on the left, and the little.
This one right here.
Yeah, I don't know. But there's so much movement in the actual design as well as the rolling of the pieces physically.
Yeah, I love that observation. I think especially this section right here really stuck out to me, because there are parts of the sort of rolling part that Leonardo Drew, the artist himself, calls a carpet. So we can use that terminology if we want to, that to me are a little bit more reminiscent of like a pattern that you would find on a carpet, an area rug. But then there are these wonderful moments that the pattern and the coloring and the lines get so much more abstracted, like we notice here. And I think you can really have some great imaginative, reflective experiences of this piece, just by looking even at different sections of the carpet form. I mean, this to me, what could this blob be? I saw in the chat that we were thinking perhaps flowers, an eye, the eye of Ra, which I don't know what that is. I would love someone to share a little more if they feel comfortable. Ooh, cave paintings have come up as well. These are some great connections y'all are making.
And it's interesting too that the one just behind it has such different colors.
Yes.
These dark reds, these much darker colors. They seem richer, but they're and different. Really, a completely different design. You know, you have circles with dots all around them. I think this artist is just fascinating.
Yeah, you can see. Unfortunately, I don't have a zoomed-in image of some of the other patterns on that more richly red section. But you can see a little bit here. I mean, it has a lot of more diamond shapes with those dots all around that you mentioned. And this section over here, a little bit more floral in design. Oh, thank you, David, for showing some examples of the Eye of Ra in the chat, if anyone is curious. I love that we're bringing up so many different points of reference, particularly with the carpet. And I'll make the connection back to the comment that, you know, New York is a very international, very diverse city with people from all across the globe that live there, that have lived there. And I think I'm going to imagine that as an artist in New York City, a lot of those encounters that you would have with a culture that might be different from the one that you came through or came up through would be constant and inspiring and interesting to influence your work visually and otherwise. And I think that's something absolutely true of Drew. I mean, he is an artist who is working internationally. Before he made this piece, you know, he was spending a lot of time in Peru and a lot of time in China studying different material traditions. So in particular in China, studying ceramic and enamel and porcelain. And I can absolutely see that coming into some of the materials that he's using for this piece, but then some of the imagery that we're noticing as well. Is that bringing up anything new or any new observations? Makes it so global, is what I'm seeing. Thanks, Diane. Yeah, there's a real sense of almost every place and any place for me when I look at this piece. It's hard to pin down to one specific reference point, which I think is really lovely, kind of opens it up in a way. What else?
I guess one thing that comes to mind for me is that the patterns on the, I'm going to call them carpet, are so large. It's like being really up close to something in your home. And then the scale of what look like the teeny tiny downtowns that you're seeing from above. And then again, juxtaposing that with the scale of the temples or towers or whatever you want to call them. I'm just, I guess Drew's playing with scale is really fascinating to me.
I agree. I feel like the scale is fascinating and disturbing, and the temple-like structures are, to me, almost apocalyptic. They seem to be, you know, inserting themselves into these cities in such a domineering way that it's a little disturbing to me.
It looks like some of those old movies about robots, you know, wandering through New York and shooting out lasers. But I was also curious that in the installation in New York, it says it extended over 100 feet. And is that the full scale here, or was something cut off going between here and New York?
That's a great question. I believe it is the same scale. Perhaps, Bree, if you know the specific answer to the length of this piece.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. It wasn't showing up. Sorry. Yeah, it's the exact same that came from New York. And so I didn't know the size, but if that says the size, it's the same as the size in New York. So, that seems about right considering the size of our ellipse.
Yeah.
That's the area of grass that's the sculpture is placed in. So, yeah.
Mhm. Yeah, so you can imagine, I mean, I think about if you were to see this piece in person, just the amount of physicality that it would require from you to be able to move around this sculpture and to really see all of the different parts of it up close. You really have to take quite a walk all around, which I think is a different experience, obviously, than we're having here tonight, but something that I think you're picking up on despite the fact that we are looking at stationary images of it, right? The amount of movement that is in the sculpture itself and the way we're kind of jumping from detail to notice how those lines are structured within this piece. I think that's a nice resonance that comes through for me on a screen, and hopefully it's for you as well.
So I wonder if there's another way to think about this where the carpets, which represent, in my mind, the artisan, the intense creativity of an artist, developing things that are perhaps in the context of a culture, but still new and different and individualistic to the artist. And then you move to another phase of civilization where we're urbanized and we begin to have a certain level of assimilation and a certain amount of conformity, which is somewhat necessitated by living in closer quarters. And then it all converges in this one very large, dominating structure in which we end up losing our individualism and our identity, which then gets back to the concept of being apocalyptic. The other idea that I had in the context of what we've been experiencing in the country in the last month is, as we are discovering, many of our monuments are the result of the dominant political trend or philosophy of a given time, and the people who are willing to put money into the creation of monuments to commemorate a particular person or a particular event, which does not necessarily represent the entirety of a population. So I think there's a couple of different pieces in it. I mean, a couple of different ideas being expressed in this piece.
Yes, absolutely. Thanks for sharing. There's a lot to unpack. Just with that idea of that scale differential we were noticing too, between these little, tiny cities. We can imagine, if part of this is meant to be playing with scale and meant to be something where we perhaps are observing from, a bird's eye view, you can see just the minuscule nature of these little forms that, to me, I read as, small cities, or thinking about, an urban cityscape, and then rising up to having these just wild sort of domineering monuments, I think absolutely takes on a different tenor in this time. And that's actually a question I'd like to ask all of you. How does looking at this work in the specific time and place that we're in make you think about the sculpture differently or bring up different ideas? Because, originally this was created last year, and so much in our world has changed as we look at something that is, meant to evoke a place, meant to evoke architecture, or something that's densely populated. Those are things that we might see with different eyes today. So I'm wondering if anything about that has caused you to think differently than you imagine you would have seen this piece, a year ago, and thoughts that are coming up then.
I was up in Richmond for my daughter had a baby, and I was up helping, and I saw the Robert E. Lee Monument, and on that monument, there's lots of graffiti, but around the base there are so many tributes. There are flowers, there are posters, there are poems, there's all kinds of things. So in some ways it reminds me of a monument in which that is being sort of repurposed, and we're asking to rethink about its meaning. So I think that's a very an interpretation or an association very much based on what we're living with right now.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Also,
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
many cities are not as populated as they were. People are leaving the cities and people are not working in the cities. So it really does give you another perspective when you think of it that way, how cities are changing. And even with the carpet things, it's like rolling out something new, rolling out a new perspective on cities. So I think it does give it a different perspective when you think of it in those terms.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Yes, I'm also seeing in the chat, I wanted to shift over to this image where we wanted to look at this confetti covered one we said. Is this the right view we're talking about? Oh no. All right, let's see if I can find a better image of that.
I think she was hoping for the middle one that we could get the image of.
That is one image that our photographer did not get for us, unfortunately. So
we have a close-up of the two on the end.
But we can see in this view, hopefully a little bit, that there is some of the same, it's almost a sort of blended version of the materials that are on this structure and this structure. There's a little bit of that verdigris peeking through, but then there's also some mosaic happening as well. I'm sorry that we don't have a close-up image of that as well. There was another thing in the chat I wanted to think about in the context of our time, where we had talked, I don't remember who brought it up, I apologize, but that this piece was originally meant to be interacted with by the public, and in the image you can see stanchions around it. And that's something that I've been thinking about when observing this piece and thinking through this piece in this particular moment about the nature of the interactivity of sculpture. You know, if you have looked up images of this piece situated in Madison Square Park a year ago, you'll see people lounging all across the carpet, people touching, kids climbing, which of course we don't want to encourage, but you know, it happens with a piece of public work. And really, to protect the safety of the visitors that come to our park, we've made a choice to close this off, to have this not be a space where people are being able to share, you know, germs and other things. And it absolutely changes, I think, the experience of the piece to not see, you know, the scale of the humans against it in these images, but then that idea of interaction. That's something that is so interesting to me because it really affects how we are using this piece. We can also see, you know, one of the things that I also see that's coming up in the chat is that, you know, the sort of natural consequence of having a piece be designed to be outside and to be so interactive is the deterioration of a piece. And I wanted to zoom in on some of the details that I had that look closely really at some of these cityscapes. And then to also see how the piece has kind of changed over the time that it has been situated there. We have these two kind of forces, right? The human and the natural, that have been acting on this piece since the moment that it was installed. And those sort of environmental considerations are something that I wanted to think of as well, because we really can't separate this piece from the environment that it's in. I wondered if any of you, as we were looking at these images, that idea of place or interactivity came up at all as we were looking at some of this.
Very much so. When I got the materials before this meeting, I was really impressed with the beautiful, I guess, interaction between the grass and the carpet, and just how thick and lush the grass looks. Maybe because the stanchions aren't letting us tromp around on it. But yeah, I just really love that interplay of the man-made and nature having her way with us.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
So I'm just gonna, I don't know if everyone saw it in the chat, just real quick, we are gonna go over a little bit since we're still in such a rich conversation and really digging into, I think, some of the juiciest parts of the sculpture. So if you need to leave, please head out whenever you need to. But Courtney, what do you think will be another 10 minutes or so?
I think so.
Okay, yeah, so you're welcome to stay, but if you have to leave, thank you for coming. But we want to keep this going a little longer, so that's it.
Yeah, so in these images, I really wanted to bring up to show you just the sort of minuscule details that, like I said, the forces of mostly nature, because we've had very few forces of humanity acting on these, but we can really see where grass is starting to grow up through the forms at the base of these monuments and through the carpet as well. And that's absolutely by the design of the artist. If you were to see this piece in person, you would notice that at the beginning of the installation, the grass was very low and very closely cropped. It actually wasn't even alive yet. It was, I believe, February when this piece was installed. So that thick Bermuda grass that we're seeing would not have been so running wild through the piece. But that is absolutely part of the intention of the artist. If you are familiar with or have seen other pieces of Drew's work, he's really interested in the idea of time and the artist himself, he himself being almost an agent that acts on a work of art. So what I mean by that is a lot of times when you see pieces of his other sculptures, it looks like the pieces might be found objects, things that you could easily find around the house, or things that you might collect out of a recycling center or something like that. But the sort of looking at the longevity of his work, he is really the one who is taking the objects that he's working with, the materials that he's working with, and having rusting processes, corroding processes, burning them, distorting them to give them a particular look that looks as if they have been aging or there is a rich story behind where they've come from. This piece is different in that he really wanted to take himself out of the process and let nature and other humans be the agents that were changing the piece over time. And I think that's something that we can see so beautifully in a lot of these details, right? Is that this piece almost is apocalyptic, right? It hasn't been touched. It's a city that has shut down, that has had no movement coming through it except for rain and wind and sun and the grass that we see. So I really want to bring back those sensory experiences that we were talking about in the sort of original centering practice of this and use our senses to really explore some of those changes. And this is where obviously some of those images of the grass would come in. If you have your grass that you collected, why don't you go ahead and take it out and give it a big sniff as we look at these images and try and think about the smell of the sculpture that we would be experiencing if we were to get so close to it that we could see this grown detail. I want to take a moment and give your grass a big sniff. What are you thinking of or noticing of by activating scent while we're looking at this image?
Brings it alive, gives it a, makes it feel more alive.
Mm-hmm. What else? I can see in the chat, Becky has said, feel of the grass beneath her toes. There's also the smell of dirt. The roots on your grass are more visual than the smell. Fascinating.
I'm more aware of the life force energy. I guess what I said was alive, but just the energy of the life force itself in conjunction with the grass growing brings the energy of the art more to my attention.
I think the grass makes it more welcoming and peaceful. Just that feeling that you get being out in nature.
We also have the ability to really zoom out and take a long view here. This is one we haven't spent much time looking at yet, but you can imagine if we were zoomed in so closely in front of this piece and looking at those small details and then backing up. So we're actually exiting the lawn where the sculpture is installed. You can really see just the amount of greenery that's surrounding it. I think it's pretty stunning for me to notice and realize just the sheer amount of grass around it, the trees, and the sky as well. Does it change the sense of scale for you to see it with this view?
It doesn't change the sense of scale for me so much, but it really, I feel a strong contrast between the, the pictures that I saw of the installation in New York, just how different this setting is from its original setting.
Definitely. Like Diane said, it's much happier in the park. Is there a mood that's coming up for you as you're looking at this? Marcy's brought up something interesting about the idea of the universe rolling on. Of course, I love the pun, thank you. Civilizations are born and eventually force themselves into rigid forms which turn into decay. So, Marcy, I'm imagining you're seeing almost an entire life cycle in this piece. Is that true for anyone else?
That comment makes me think of like the space-time waves that they talk about in the universe. I don't think I would have gotten there if it hadn't been for her comment. But that comment does make me think about, the universe kind of flowing over little things like planets.
I think similarly, I don't know if you saw Elizabeth mention that it made her think of the Buddhist philosophy of impermanence. This was a little further up in the chat, talking just about how everything kind of always maybe goes back into where it came from. Nothing lasts forever, nothing permanent. I don't know if Elizabeth, you want to speak to that some more? This idea of decay and
Yeah, I think, as someone who loves art, the idea of decay and things not lasting is hard to is hard to accept. But at the same time, the sort of rolling carpets, and now as we've been looking more closely at the grass growing, and even the different, what looked to me like different states of the kind of temple-like structures, is just reminding me of that Buddhist concept of impermanence, and the ways that as people we are shaken back into or reminded of that sense of like groundlessness and impermanence in different ways. And one of the authors that I love is the Buddhist nun Pema Chodron, and she talks a lot about moments in life when the rug is pulled out from under us and we're brought back to a sense of awareness of what Buddhists feel are the true state of of our existence. So I know that's sort of going off topic a little bit, but the more we look at this, the more I'm seeing that in the different forms, and just the beauty of that expressed visually in the growth and the colors and the carpets and all of the structures that are here.
Thank you. That's so lovely. I can see that's really resonating with a bunch of folks in the chat as well. So I don't want to stop discussing this piece, but I do want to pull back just as we think about wrapping up. And I want to just take a moment to kind of reflect on the experience of looking deeply and discussing this work today. I'm guessing that this is, something that we are all craving, right? Is to look at art and to think deeply about its place, not only in our world, but in our own personal lives. And I want to just ask, as you reflect on some of the conversations that we've had today and some of the ideas that have been brought up so beautifully by so many of you, so did you gain any insights from looking at this particular work this particular way? And if you did, if you would like to share, we'd love to hear.
I think the length of time spent exploring this really contributes to expanding on perception of it, and also sharing with others observations really expands on my experience as well. So I really appreciated this format very much, along with the meditation in the beginning. It was really, really nice, which contributed, the meditation contributed to the experience of the perception of the piece.
Mm-hmm.
Yay! That was what we were hoping. That's good.
Good. Awesome.
I think this may have been a better format than actually being there in person, because if you had a group of 30 people walking around and looking at this, I don't think the conversation would have been as rich.
Mm.
It would be hard to do in person rather than in this format.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we are lucky that the adaptations that we have been forced to take to gather in this way do lend us to have I feel like it's a pretty rich experience of a piece. So I'm glad that that's coming up for some of you as well. I wanted to see in the chat, I was seeing that some of you shared that it made you consider ideas that were different from ones that you may have had on your own. And I love that part of the shared experience of looking together. I mean, it always enriches my experience of a work to hear so many different perspectives and to hear from people who are experts in their own sense in the world and place in the world. And I'm so, so grateful that y'all have been so open and sharing what you have thought and experienced. So thank you. I want to encourage you to not only think about, you know, if you feel comfortable and are able visiting this piece in person. Our park is currently open. We're asking that people do respect the social distancing rules that we have in place to be able to view this, but it'll definitely give you a different perspective than the virtual experience we've had today. And also to think about how you can take some of these ideas of slowness that we've introduced through breeze centering practice, through some of the sensory explorations that we've tried, and even just focusing our attention in different ways to other parts of your life, to looking at works of art, to sitting in a garden, to really taking some of that and helping us get through our quarantine.
Real quick, I put it in the chat, but just so you all know, it's going to be deinstalled September 8th. So make sure if you wanted to see it, you got out there before then. I wouldn't want you to be really sad if you waited till the fall. Mm-hmm. It's moving on to another location, and I cannot remember where. I feel like it's like Indiana or
maybe I don't remember off the top of my head.
Maybe Angela can tell us if she knows. I feel like she knew. So they have to deinstall it to get it to the next place. We're not sure what state it will be in, like condition, when it goes to the next location. But like Diane said in the chat, Leonardo Drew, sounds like the more degraded it is, the happier he will be. So that, and I just also, the next Slow Art, we're going to be doing this at least monthly right now, once a month. So the next one is August 26th. And we will be sharing that out through the email list and on the webpage soon. So just keep an eye out to sign up and those details. Okay, Angela says Alabama or Arkansas. So I was not close, but that's where it's going, somewhere over there. Mm-hmm. Anything else, Courtney?
That's it for me. I just want to again thank you all so much for all of the wonderful questions that you've had, the wonderful observations that you brought up. And I'm just so grateful that you were able to join us this evening.
Yeah, I don't think it's not the same without all of your insights and voices. So this was wonderful. And yes, we're recording it and it will be up soon. So you can always share it or watch it again.
Wonderful. Right. Well, thank you all for joining us. We're going to wrap up, and I hope to see you at a future iteration of Slow Art.